All right, welcome to another PSL Demo Day. I'm your host, Jason DeBacker, and I'm also going to be the presenter today. I'm an associate professor of economics at the University of South Carolina. I'm president of the PSL Foundation, and in the PSL catalog, I help maintain the OGUSA and cost of capital calculator models. Today, what I want to show you is how to contribute to open source projects, in particular open source projects in the PSL ecosystem. So I'm going to take you through some general things to look for if you think you might want to contribute, and then go through some technical steps that you'll need to do to kind of set yourself up to actually contribute to modifying the source code of various PSL projects. All right, so I'm going to share my whole desktop because I'm going to use a couple different applications. I'm going to bounce between my web browser and a terminal window on my computer. Okay, so the place I'm starting, if you want to follow along, I'm at github.com/PSL models. This is the homepage for the PSL GitHub organization. Housed within this organization are a number of different repositories that represent projects in the PSL ecosystem. So these could be projects that are in the PSL catalog, that is, they've met criteria and certain standards of admission to the PSL catalog, or they can be incubating projects, projects that have kind of expressed a desire to be cataloged once they meet those criteria. Okay, so we can scroll through here, and there are a number of cataloged and incubating projects, more than a dozen in this community, okay, and housed in this GitHub organization. So if you're interested in contributing in PSL, one thing you might do is look through and see what models are in this library that you might have an interest in. We can see some models related to policy change in China, models related to the economy in the United Kingdom or in the US, micro-simulation models for the United Kingdom, for the United States, business tax related models. And there's other models in this ecosystem. So you could look through and see kind of what you might have an interest in. Once you find a project that you have an interest in, we can dive further into them by going to their GitHub pages. So let me take us to the tax calculator page. Okay. So suppose you had an interest in kind of thinking about tax policy in the United States. You might jump into the tax calculator project. Not knowing necessarily where to begin, kind of the best place to go is to this issues tab in the repository. If we look through the issues, these are outstanding issues that either maintainers of the model have opened or other users of the model have opened that kind of signify maybe something that might need to be updated or fixed in the model, okay? And so if you're a new contributor, one nice thing to look for is you can see some of these different issues have tags next to them. In particular, I want to point out the green help wanted tags. So that's something where a maintainer of this model has suggested, hey, this is an issue, something that maybe needs to be added to the model, and it's something that is potentially a good place for somebody who is coming from outside to jump in and help with, okay? So one of these we can look at is an issue, additional child tax credit from the Biden plan, okay? And this is kind of summarizing, so saying Biden's child tax credit expansion requires some additional parameters that are not currently in the tax calc model. Okay, give some description of what those parameters might summarize here. In this case, expansion of the child tax credit under some proposals by President Biden. Okay, so the idea is, or this issue, the idea behind it is that, hey, it would be nice if tax calculator had the ability to model this recent proposal by the president. Okay, and so we can think of issues like that expand the capacity of the model. There are other issues as well that deal anything from kind of improving kind of computational time, so very specific software development issues, to more, general issues of just kind of model documentation and so on. And so you can sort through these issues and get a sense of, where could I jump in? All right. So each of the GitHub repositories in the PSL catalog has an issues tab where you can see outstanding issues. And model maintainers, if they're doing a good job maintaining their models, are going to have issues tagged in certain ways that can help new users identify where they can jump into the project and contribute. All right. So that's kind of the, just how do I think about these different projects in the policy simulation library? once I identify a specific project, how do I identify where I can jump in, where I can be of help to that project? That's through looking at the Issues tab. Right now, suppose that you identified an issue you wanted to help with. The next steps then is to get yourself set up with the proper software to make changes to the code in a way that's going to be tracked and in a way that's going to be accessible to others working on the project. All right. Tax calculator is a good example, but other projects in the PSL library also have very nice documentation that'll take you step by step through how to get set up with that software. All right, and so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to click here on this tab that's going to take us to the documentation for the tax calculator model. Excuse me, click on this hyperlink to the right. All right, this is going to bring up documentation for the tax calculator model. This is a large document with many chapters here, and we can click through. And they're really useful for getting a sense of how to use the model, what are the different policy parameters, input variables, output variables, and so on. What I want to jump down to, though, is how do we contribute to the model, right? That's our topic of discussion today. How do we contribute to one of these models in the PSL library, right? So we've identified an issue, and we want to help out this project by addressing that outstanding issue. So I'm going to click down here to the contributing guide chapter of this documentation. This document is going to start kind of at the basics. How do I set up Python to use this, because the code base for this particular model is written in Python. And then it's going to tell us how to set up software called Git, which is going to help us do version control. Okay, I'm going to skip over the installation of Python. We'll have future demo days where we talk about exactly how to set up your Python for use with many PSL models. I'll kind of jump over how to set up Git and your GitHub profile. I'll link you to some documentation at the end of this that'll be helpful for getting there. Where I want to start is under the assumption you've installed the necessary software, Git and GitHub on your computer. How do we get that source code for one of these PSL models onto our machine and in a place where we can work with it? Okay. So again, tax calculator lays this out really well, kind of step by step how to set this up. And we're going to start right here. So we're going to go to GitHub and we're going to create a fork of this tax calculator repository. So let me do that in another tab here. So I'm back at that tax calculator repository page. And in the top right, there's this button called fork. Okay. So what you want to do, if you haven't done this before, you want to create a copy of this repository that's your own. Okay. And you do that by clicking on fork. And when you do that, if you've already forked it, as I have, it's going to say you've already forked it, but I could fork it again to different GitHub organizations I help run. For you, what you'll want to do, if you haven't already forked it, you'll want to fork it most likely to your GitHub profile. So in my case, my GitHub profile is Jason DeBacker, all right? So you'd want to fork it to your GitHub profile. What that is going to do is that's going to create a copy of this where it's going to be github.com/your username. So for me, Jason DeBacker, / the name of the repository that you forked, okay? And you can see right under that in the top left, it's saying where it's forked from, okay? So that's step one. We want to create a copy of this on the internet that is separate from kind of that kind of master code base that we're not going to want to change, that only the tax calculator maintainers have permission to change, okay? Okay, the next thing we want to do, because we want to edit these files to help contribute to that project, we want to bring the files that represent the source code to this project down onto our local machine where we can edit them, okay? So to do that, we're going to want to click here on code, and then we're going to want to copy this URL here, okay? You can just click the clipboard right here. All right, now I've copied that to my clipboard. Now I'm going to switch to a different application. I'm going to go to my terminal window, okay? All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give a command to Git on my machine to copy those files. But first, I want to navigate myself to a place where I want to keep the tax calculator code on my machine. So first, let me just create a new directory. And then I'm going to navigate to that directory. I called it repos2. And once I'm at the place where I want to save these tax calculator files, and just a note, it's going to create a new folder in this directory called tax-calculator. Once I navigate to that place where I want to save this tax calculator folder with all of its associated files, I'm going to type git clone, and then I'm going to paste that URL that we just copied. Okay. Let me make this a little bigger. All right. After I click clone, oops, what we've got here is, just checking the chat, we're downloading those files from the tax calculator repository that we forked. Okay, so we gave it this URL, github.com/our username/tax calculator, and it's downloading all of those files. Okay, so this is going to put those on our machine, again, in a folder called tax calculator in whatever directory we were in when we gave the git clone command. All right, since I'm on Zoom right now, this is downloading slower than expected. So let me show you kind of what this is going to look like in a picture. All right. So I mentioned we had some instructions set up for installing Git and using Git. And I'm going to navigate to where those instructions are, pslmodels.github.io/git-tutorial. And in this Git tutorial, we've got, and this Git tutorial is a PSL repository itself. And it just kind of helps document the general workflow that's used by various PSL projects. So again, while we're still downloading Tax Calculator to my machine, we kind of walk through what we're doing here. And so in this Git tutorial, I'm on this Git and GitHub collaborative workflow chapter. I want to highlight this picture here. It's a really nice illustration of how one works with Git. Okay, so just to point out what we've done so far, we started in the main repository, github.com/pslmodel/tax calculator. Okay, that's box A here in the upper right. We made a fork of that repository. So we took action 1 and forked it, making a copy of that main repository under our GitHub username. Okay, so we created box B with that fork. The next thing we did is we tried to clone that fork, and that's what's in process right now. So that's arrow 2 going down from box B to box C. So arrow 2 is creating another kind of version of those files that are going to be on our local machine. And that's going to be important so we can edit those files on our local machine. Okay. And again, just to jump back to the contributor guide here, we are now on step 6, cloning tax calculator. Okay. All right, so let me open another terminal here and go to where I've already downloaded tax calculator. So I'm going to navigate to my tax calculator repository. You might have put it at a different path, but mine is in my root directory under a folder called repos. Okay, so I'm going to navigate to tax calculator. And again, that is outlined here. So we're at step 7 in this guide on the tax calculator contributor guide. All right. One of the things we're going to want to do is we're going to want to configure this so it can point to not just the fork that we cloned, but also to that other repository, that main repository that is under PSL Models GitHub organization. So what you'll do for that is you're going to type git remote add, and then you're going to give a name for that main repository. Typically, the nomenclature to use in GitHub is that main repository is called the upstream repository. So here we're going to name that PSL models repository the upstream repository. And then the name that's given by default to our fork of that is origin. Okay, so we'll see these names upstream and origin. They're just referring to the main repository and our fork of it. Okay, and I'm going to need to put one more thing with this command, and that is a URL. And that URL is to the main repository. So I'm at PSL model/tax calculator, and I click on that green code button again. I copy that URL, and I'm going to paste that here. Okay, so that we look to that upstream repository. So here I'm in the tax calculator repo I've already worked with, not the new one I was trying to set up, which is still only at 45% download. So I've already created that upstream repository. If you haven't done this step, you won't have that error. You will have created a new upstream repository, and you can see this, you can check this by typing git remote-b. And that's going to list all of the remote repositories, those on the internet, that your local repository, the thing on your computer, is connected to. And so you can see here I'm connected to 2 repositories on the internet. One of them is my fork, JDeBacker/tax calculator. The other is that upstream repository, PSL models/tax calculator. Okay. So we've configured that. So now we've got the files on our computer. These files are kind of connected, or that is, we can kind of share changes with those repositories on the internet by configuring these remote repositories. And then, now we've got all the code. So if we look in this folder, there's a bunch of files. There's more here than you would have with a fresh clone. I've put some different files I've worked with right in this folder. But we've got all the source code. And so I can look at, navigate to tax calculator/tax calc. And in that directory are the various files that make up the source code for the tax calculator model. Okay, so everything is on our machine, ready to be worked with. But before we go start changing files, there's a few things that we're going to want to do. So the first thing we're going to want to do is make sure that we have all of the Python dependencies that we'll need to work with tax calculator. Okay, that is handled really well in virtually all of the PSL projects, certainly all of the catalog PSL projects, in that they're going to have some environment set up for you, which means once we load this, what's called a virtual environment, we're going to have all of the various Python packages and in the certain versions that are necessary to run these models. Okay, so I've highlighted here this environment.yml file. And that's going to help us create an environment, in this case, for tax calculator. Okay, so what I'm going to do here, I'm going to type conda env create. Oops. All right. Let me just, before I hit enter, let me just show you that is in that contributor guide that we've been following along for tax calculator. It's right here. So we're now on step 9. We configured the upstream. Now we're creating this environment. Okay. I'm going to create this environment. And again, we'll see how we're doing with my internet connection, because this is going to go download from anaconda.org and other places on the internet, the package versions that we need to run tax calculator. Okay, so it's going to, again, download some files to your computer. And after this, we're going to kind of enter into this Python environment so that we can work with those new packages we've just downloaded. Let me kill my other download, see if that helps. So again, this step is assuming that you've installed Python previously to your machine, and in particular, the Anaconda distribution of Python. And that was highlighted on that contributor guide to tax calculator, and is with other repositories as well in their contributor guides, or the analog to their contributor guides. Okay, just checking my chat there. While this is downloading, and got a great comment from Rick, who is saying, in this diagram, you can see these dashed lines here, and the horizontal dashed line is there to kind of separate what is on your local machine, which is below that horizontal dashed line, versus what is in the cloud or on the internet, which is above the dashed line. Okay, so like boxes A and B, which are that main repository, and then your fork of it, those things live in the cloud on github.com. Below the line, box C that we created by cloning that repository to our computer, right? That exists just on our local machine, all right? And so the way this is going to work, we bring those files to our local machine, we'll make some changes to them, and then we'll push them to the cloud. Okay. All right, so going back to my terminal window, we see that we have finished installing the package dependencies, and it's giving us what we need to do next. So if we want to activate this environment, we type conda activate, and then the name of the environment, which is taxcalc-dev. So just copy that and paste it here. And now I've activated my environment. I can see that I'm in that because to the left of my prompt, now instead of base, which stood for base Python environment, now I'm in this specific Python environment, the taxcalc development environment, okay? So again, this is gonna ensure that I've got all of the necessary dependencies on my computer, all right? All right, there's still, before you start editing source code, I think there's still one more step that I would wanna see one take, and that is, let's make sure everything works, right? We got this source code on our computer, we've got the Python packages we need to run this. Let's just make sure everything runs, all right? So let me go back to that contributor guide because it's showing us how we can check that, all right? So we've activated our environment. And then what we're gonna do is to test that this runs, let's just run some of the unit tests, some of the tests that check to make sure the tax calculator code works, okay? So to do that, I'm gonna navigate to the taxcalc directory, so tax-calculator/taxcalc, all right? So I just gotta go one level down here. And from that directory, I'm gonna run the following, and I just copied that from the contributor guide, all right? So this command is saying pytest, which is Python package pytest. We're calling that to run some tests on our code. We're gonna give it a marker here. We're gonna say, hey, don't run tests that require a certain file that you won't have. And let's skip a few other tests that are some pre-release tests that are for kind of packaging and releasing a new version of Tax Calculator. And then last, we're going to give it an option that's just going to run this in these tests in parallel. Okay, so just to make this go a little bit faster. All right, so this is going to be our check. If this works, if we start running these tests, things are looking really good. When the tests finish, we know that, hey, we're able to kind of fully run all of the packages. We're getting a few warnings here about some things that might be deprecated in the future. And then the green dots are showing that tests are being run and that they're passing. All right, and with that, now we've got that code on our machine. We've got the Python environment set up, and we know that everything works as expected, okay? We'll have full confirmation of that once all of the tests finish running, which can take several minutes, okay? All right, so at this point, we're essentially ready to start working with the code, okay? So what does that mean? That means that we'll want to potentially open up some of the source code files and maybe start modifying some of them, okay? Now, if we're gonna modify those files, we wanna do it in a way that's careful. We wanna make sure we kind of retain the code that we know works, the thing that we're running the tests on here, just in case our changes happen to break something, all right? So we wanna keep a nice clean copy of that code on our machine and then make any changes of that code kind of in a separate place, all right? And so let me save some time here, and I'm just gonna kill these tests. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show us how to create that safe place to make changes to the code, all right? So in Git, we've got different copies of the code on different branches, okay? So I just typed git branch. I wanted to set up that clean repository, but I got impatient with the download here while I'm on Zoom. And so I'm not in a clean repository. I'm in one where I've done a fair bit of work in Tax Calculator. So when I type git branch, I have, what do I have here? 6 branches listed, okay? You might have initially just one, and that branch would be called master, okay? I have 6 because I've done some different work, but let me just get to that master branch, and we can always change our branches by typing git checkout and then the name of the branch. Okay, and so I'm now on the master branch, and I can see that if I type git branch again, master is highlighted. All right, so this is where you would be by default. And when you want to start working with that code, before you touch any files and make any modifications, the best practice is to check out a new branch. And you're going to do that with git checkout -b, and then the name of the branch, okay? And so we could just call this, your new branch, all right? And it's giving us a message. We switched to a new branch called your new branch. And now what you would do is you open up in your favorite text editor the files that you wanted to modify, and you'd make those changes, and those changes would then be added to this branch, okay? Let me give one example of that here. So I'm going to open up some tax calculator file in my text editor here. So I had tax calculator in a folder called repos. That's where I keep all of my repositories. It's up to you how you want to organize things. But I like, this works for me anyway, I guess. All right, so I'm going to tax calc where the source code to the file is. And let's suppose that what I want to do is I want to, maybe there is, with the expanded child tax credit, I want to start by seeing if I can adjust some of the parameters to the model, all right? All right, so maybe what I want to do is I want to adjust that maximum child tax credit. Okay, let's suppose that was the change that was necessary. I'm just making this up here, all right? So I'm going to say that Biden wants to expand that maybe in 2021, and he wants it to go from $2,000 to $4,000. Okay. And that'll happen just up until 2026 in this case. All right, so I make that change in the file, edit a couple lines, adding those new lines there, and save it. All right, now let me go back to my terminal window. I'm going to do a git status -u. That's going to tell me, hey, is anything changed that Git is keeping track of? Okay, and indeed that file that we just edited is one that shows modifications to it. There's another that I've edited in some separate context, but the one we just changed was that policy current law.json. Okay, so if I like those changes, I feel good about that. I want to add those changes to the Git history. So I type git add and then the name of the file. And then if I want to get those ready to push them to the cloud, I'm going to type a git commit. I want to give a little message here. All right, so a short but descriptive message is good with any of your commits. And I'll just say I added an expanded child tax credit in 2021, kind of descriptive of the change we made there, all right? And I commit that change. And what that means is this is ready to be pushed, all right? And that means that I can put these changes in the cloud, right? And I can do that by git push origin and then the name of my branch. In this case, we call it your new branch. Okay. And you see some output here saying, hey, these things are being pushed to the cloud. They're being uploaded to our new branch, right? And so if I want to see where that came out in the cloud, I can go to the tax calculator repo where it's going to pop up here with a compare and pull request. I could also go to my fork of tax calculator where I'll get that same message if I want to pull a request. I can also see the changes here by looking at the different branches. Here I have even more. I should probably clean this up. But there's your new branch, the one we just created, which has those new files, or the new file we just changed, all right, along with all the other files. Right? When I think I'm done adding all of those changes, I click compare and pull request. All right, so now I've done all of the different changes to the model I think I want to do. And I can open a pull request in the upstream repository. All right. In this case, I'm just testing things. I made a change that isn't really meaningful, and I can just close this tab to close that pull request, but that's the process that you would follow. All right. And again, I want to highlight here this contributor guide that's with Tax Calculator that takes you through these steps. As I said, many other PSL models have a similar contributor guide that'll take you through downloading and installing the necessary software, be it Python or R, setting up your GitHub remote fork, and then cloning to your machine and so on, and take you through those steps to make sure that you've got the files and that things run, all right? From that point forward, you can check out the GitHub tutorial, okay, pslmodels.github.io/git-tutorial. And that'll take you through further detail about how to continue to work with these files, how to do things like create a project branch that we just did, update files through adding and committing changes, pushing those to your remote branch, and then merging them, or submitting a pull request to the main repository, upon which project maintainers will review your changes to the code and accept or reject those changes. And typically any kind of non-acceptance is going to come with feedback from those project maintainers, okay? All right, so giving you a general sense of how to look for places you can contribute to PSL models, I kind of dive into getting set up with the particular, kind of Python environment and the Git file and the files tracked on your machine through Git. Lastly, I just want to point out that the PSL community is really vibrant. And that's another place to really look and think how you can become involved and contribute to these projects. And so I'll just navigate here to pslmodels.org/events. And so on the PSL homepage and on the events page at the PSL Models website, you can see upcoming events. And as you can see here, there's multiple events every week. Some are project specific, some are community wide. And those are, open calls on Zoom like this one where you can join the community, ask questions, ask about where you might contribute to projects or get specific feedback on what you might be working on in one of those projects. So I would encourage you, if you have interest in the PSL community, to join us for any one of these events, okay? In addition, for kind of technical questions, the GitHub issues, as I pointed out, is a really great place to work. If you have more general questions, we have a discourse format, discourse.pslmodels.org, where you can ask non-technical questions related to the community projects and have a back and forth there regarding that. So there's a number of places to jump in and see where you can work in the PSL community, get a sense of what the interests are, what the needs are for specific projects, and we'd love to see you come join us and contribute. All right, so thanks so much for joining today. We'll see you back here in the demo days in 2 weeks, but like I said, we'd also love to see you on any of those other PSL events. All right, take care, bye.